Special webinar in store today with a really diversified group of panelists from the AEC industry. We're going to be discussing BIM standards, some of the challenges associated with creating, implementing, and enforcing standards, and also how good BIM standards can drive ROI for our firms. And it looks like we've got a really great turnout today. So just want to thank everyone for spending some time with us. So let me introduce our guests today. We've got a great group of BIM brains on the line with us. I'm really excited about the group here. Chris Schaefer unfortunately had a last-second scheduling conflict, got called out to the field, so he won't be able to join us, but we do have some great insights that he's provided that we're going to talk about. But Chris is a digital design leader for BIM content at HDR, works out of their Boston office. We also have Dat Lien, who's the president of Axoscape, which is a BIM consulting firm based out of Houston, and he works with a diverse customer base across Texas. Robert Manna works for Stantec out of their Boston office. He's a member of the Buildings Group Digital Practice Team, and Robert is a leader in implementation and support of new processes and technologies throughout the organization. My colleague, Parley Burnett, who's our Director of Customer Success here at UNIFI, who many of you have worked with to implement UNIFI products and services. And then myself, Steve Germano, I work as Director here at UNIFI also. I explore new product ideas and other various biz dev responsibilities. Okay, so for all of our listeners, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section on the WebEx. You'll see that little Q&A button. You can click on that, ask questions throughout the webinar to our panelists, and we'll try to answer your questions throughout the presentation, as well as at the end we'll have a dedicated Q&A section. We'll also be sending out a recording via email at the end of the presentation, so feel free to share that with your colleagues. And for anybody's questions who we don't get answered during the presentation, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards via email or directly contact you. All right, so let's start off with a little discussion about what happens when companies implement any new system or process into their business. Whether your company is implementing a new CRM or an ERP system or moving to BIM, your business is going to be investing in this new process. So with new processes comes training of staff, initial loss of productivity and profit, and now this investment is calculated by each firm and expected to yield advancements in profit and productivity over the previous process or system. That's why we're making the investment, right? So all that's really needed is time, and the more time that passes, the more efficient a firm will become. So there's a gentleman named Jared Banks. He's got a really great blog post called "Why BIM is Still Bankrupting Your Firm," which is hyperlinked down below here. It's a really great blog post there. Jared talks about the realities of BIM with or versus without a solid template. And it's a great read. I encourage you guys to check it out and check out his blog. And we're gonna kind of take this topic and expand on it a bit. So I'm sure everyone has seen the traditional McLeamy curve a million times by now, and what I really like about this particular graphic is a spin on that. It shows the reality of producing BIM with powerful streamlined templates versus not having that a well-performing template in place. So template work needs to be done as part of your upfront investment a firm makes to minimize the impact of each BIM project moving forward. And so you can see here on the curve, you've got your traditional 2D CAD workflows with AutoCAD, you've got the idealized BIM curve, which is the traditional McLeamy curve, and then you have the two additional curves. So the BIM workflow without templates, which does shift a lot of that work into the documentation phase, and then you have the BIM template workflow, where when you are streamlined, you can be even more optimized than the idealized BIM curve. So the document work in any BIM authoring software like Revit greatly reduces the amount of documentation needed per project, as much of this setup is done ahead of time. But for any of us who have been in a firm where there is no real template in place, just how much work is involved in just getting your views to print correctly, right? We're doing a lot of this work manually, and that can be extremely costly to a firm and take much more time than traditional 2D CAD workflows than the firm is really used to. So a lot of these firms end up going pretty negative when you first start implementing this type of software, but a lot of that is because of this redundant work due to the lack of templates. So now moving from a lot of that redundant documentation work into your template work, you start to move your staff's effort curve per project closer to that idealized BIM curve. So we want to move the project development time to the process development time. And so I'll start with a question to our panelists here. Robert, where would you say in your firm, being a large firm like Stantec, a global firm, where would you say your firm currently sits as far as having a well-oiled template? I would assume everything is perfect, right?
Oh yeah, everything's perfect in the wide world of 5,000 some odd buildings employees. No, we are probably somewhere on our journey to having a well-oiled template. We have a very good baseline that I like to say is absolutely nothing to absolutely everybody, but that baseline is the key graphics, and it really provides a solid base for our users to start on and add individualized content to as needed. So we at least know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of our Revit projects across Stantec are in fact starting with our core corporate templates and going from there. So it is a long journey without a doubt.
And you are seeing that the project development time is starting to move into that process time. So is your curve there starting to look more like the famous McLeamy curve at this point?
I think in an idealized world, yes, our teams that are very knowledgeable about everything that's available and how to use it, absolutely. But being such a large organization, we also have a variety of expertise levels across the organization. So, if you average it out, yeah.
Okay, no worries. So continuing on, now this is not a one-time effort, right? We hear many firms who streamline their templates back in 2010 to maybe 2012 timeframe when they first implemented BIM. They never really kept them up to date. Today, the process is kind of messy. So this work needs to be ongoing and maintained just like any other process or system within your firm. The best part of this is that with small incremental updates, we can continue to increase team productivity and job costs this work, keeping utilization rates high. So Dad, are you on the line as well?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great. Thanks. So quick question for you. So being a BIM consultant, you're exposed to several firms' workflows and processes, right? So what are some of the telling signs of not having good standards in place? And what are those red flags that our listeners should be on the lookout for?
Oh yeah. They're pretty obvious. A lot of times, you see folks going to sites like RevitCity.com or even Autodesk Seek, which is now BIM Object. I'm sure all the seasoned Revit folks here saw that switch. We were kind of scratching our heads a little bit, but I think Autodesk has a really good explanation for why they went with BIM Object instead of trying to maintain their own content library. Users are complaining about having to go and hunt down content. That's usually a pretty good red flag. And then the other telltale sign, that templates aren't probably where they need to be, or content isn't where it needs to be, is that they're kind of playing Robin Hood a little bit. They're stealing from some rich content from other projects and copying and pasting into their existing projects. And the issue, of course, with all of these activities is that they're losing time, they're losing productivity. We kind of monitor things here and try to keep track of how much time is lost, and it could be anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes on a good scenario. That's if you find what you're looking for and you don't have to tweak it too much. But 5 to 10 minutes per content, and then multiply that by however many times you're doing that, plus over and over, you're doing it over and over again on every single project. That's some huge loss of production time there. So.
Yeah, we call that grave robbing, right? Where you're going into a project, you say, oh yeah, I know I did this custom piece of equipment in this project. You go and open it up, it takes a couple minutes. So then you got to hunt it down in the project and copy and paste in your live project. Takes time for sure, and that those minutes add up right over the length of a project, and it really starts eating our profitability. And so, you know, as a communicating the value of our standards upward to management, it's really an essential part to ensure that proper time and funds are available for ongoing investment in these areas, right? So some of the ROI is quantitative, like being able to reuse well-created templates on every project, or being able to keep resources on billable projects over non-billable work like template work. Other areas are more qualitative, right, as in having the ability to be more consistent in our Revit estimations, right, and having more data consistency across the firm, reducing potential RFIs or change orders related to inaccuracy or of BIM data in our BIMs. And so, Robert, question for you, like, how do you monitor the effectiveness of this type of investment? Has a firm like yours, being the scale and size that you are, how do you measure success? Is it on a per project basis? How do you guys really quantify that?
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
we measure, very broadly, we measure success by virtue of we get fewer phone calls about why is my project losing money, or you know, why is BIM terrible, and things like that. But also we've begun collecting data, as I was mentioning earlier when apparently it got cut off. We've begun collecting data about how often and where and how our quote-unquote standards or best practices are being used, so that we can get visibility into, again, who's using our stuff and who's continuing to use, you know, their own little cluster of content without sort of participating in the greater good. And we also we're a UNIFI customer, and we know which business centers have approached us about having their own library of content in UNIFI. Because if they have their own library of content in UNIFI, that means they know what UNIFI is. That means they're encouraging the use of UNIFI, which also hopefully means they're also using our corporate standard content as well. So we don't have definitive measurements, but we have a lot of indirect measurements that are definitely more along the qualitative side versus the quantitative side.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I hear that a lot from most of our customers. It is hard to quantify today, and folks are really looking for more and more analytics to be able to do those types of things. So, well, thanks for that, Robert. I appreciate that. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Parley, who's going to share a little bit of insights from global trends that we happen to see on the UNIFI platform. With that, Parley, take it away.
I'll mute myself there. Thank you, Steve. I think that's a nice way to frame the conversation, really, that the effort spent on data consistency is well worth it, but that we also need to quantify it, and that I think is one of the main challenges. And that you asked a question there to our panelists, but I think rhetorically for our audience here, I think it'd be interesting for everybody to ask themselves within your own firms, what are the red flags or what are the signs that are indicative of maybe deeper underlying issues with your content? I think it's an interesting question. Really, so at UNIFI, we do sit in a unique position where we can look at aggregated global usage data and start to identify some trends. One of the ones we're showing here, we'll go through a few, is on average, our accounts are hosting or storing around 5,000 elements within UNIFI. I think that's probably larger, probably more than most folks would have guessed, but that's where we're sitting at in terms of an average. And then on the right-hand side, that bar there is showing these are elements that are actually never inserted, and that's probably higher than most people would think as well. And I'm not here to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but the point here is if we're talking about standards, focus on the content that's utilized, right? It's foolish to spend time on content that wouldn't actually be used. And that's actually one of the benefits of UNIFI, right, is twofold. You can host as much content as you want, right? So there's no issue with consolidation, right? Going throughout your offices, grabbing all the content off folks' machines and network drives and things like that. Put it all in one place to start with, and there's no limit with UNIFI, right? And the other is you understand actually who's using what content and what content's most used. So again, not saying to purge out unused content. In fact, on this slide, what we're showing is there does seem to be a relationship between accounts who have a lot of content in their library and healthy insertion usage, which I think is kind of interesting, where we took kind of like the top 25% of firms that we deem to have healthy insertion usage per user. Their libraries are much larger than others.
And why do you think that is? Is that because these folks start to trust, like, hey, when I go in this single location and start to look for content, I feel pretty confident, hey, I'm going to find something in this library database that I'm going to be able to use. Whereas on the other side of that, if folks are going into a library that doesn't have a lot of content, they're just used to not kind of finding what they're looking for, so they kind of stop going back there? Or what do you think the psychology is behind that?
Yeah, I think it's if the library is large, there is a psychology that even if they're not using it, it's kind of like Google. There's sort of a security that you feel by knowing that there's lots to peruse, even though you don't likely even go beyond the first page or two of a Google search result. But probably some of that going on, I would say.
Right.
This next one here, I think a lot of us have been curious in the past about industry-wide which versions of Revit are most used. Probably no surprise here that Revit 2016 is highest. This data was back in March, so going forward, we'll obviously see some Revit 2018 numbers start popping up here. But in a standards context, I wanted to just ask our panel, what does the Revit versioning have to do with our standards and content and projects, in fact? Like, how far back, I'll ask you, Robert, how far back does Stantec go in Revit version support?
Officially or unofficially? We sort of try to stick to what Autodesk sort of supports out of the box, which is basically, the 1+3, so effectively 4 versions is what we actively support. But, case in point, I can tell you our support is quickly trailing off for 2014. We were never terribly active in 2015 for a variety of reasons. And, our focus is looking forward, and particularly with the recent changes that came about in 2017 and 2016 with the text changes, I've forgotten now, that also had us draw a line in the sand in terms of how actively we were supporting past content because of the changes there. So it's a mix of where do we see activity, features in the platform, and where we're trying to drive people.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the text changes. I was talking to a customer just yesterday, in fact, that firm-wide now, all new content that's got annotation text in it, they're doing in 2017 format. So kind of interesting. How does this affect the management of your template?
It's a pain. Yeah, I mean, again, we had to draw a line in the sand in terms of the text changes, because we had to go through and update all the templates for that. So that really becomes our go forward point from there. And, we definitely take the strategy of, we will try to maintain older stuff within reason, but we are not going to look back very much, because by and large, we want projects starting up in newer versions, particularly where we're oftentimes delivering very large projects where it's not good for us to be starting in the past to begin with, because we're just starting behind at that point. So we definitely try to drive people to move forward. We do things to encourage people to upgrade where possible by basically doing things in newer versions and not going back and redoing those things in older versions.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Yeah, so next here, we have some interesting data points to show you, and later on in the presentation, we'll be showing you some of our capabilities to analyze content. But a few to show here that we've observed as a trend. First is that on average, for every top-level family, there are 2 nested families included with that. So if your library size is 500 parent-level families, it's very likely that you have in reality 1,500 total families to manage. Maybe something we don't think a lot about, but the reality is, in standards, a lot of these nested families do impact the quality of a parent-level family, right? Whether that's imported CAD or parameters are running afoul, right? They're shared families, so that's a problem. Something to think about there. Next here is interesting. We took several of our customers, they shared their standard shared parameter files with us, and we measured those parameters against their actual content. And we found that on average, 53% of all families contain parameters that match one of those names, but use a different GUID, or maybe they're a family parameter. So kind of interesting there, right? So some to-do work for everybody. And then 62% of parameters in shared parameter files are never utilized. This one really kind of caught me by surprise. I would have thought it would be much less than that. And I'm really curious as to what the story is behind this. I doubt that there was some BIM committee, at stake here that just got together and brainstormed a bunch of parameters that could potentially be used, and they ended up only using 38% of them. I don't think that's the story. I think there's probably content that cycles out of our libraries from years ago that use parameters, and we just never take the time to update our shared parameter file.
Yeah, I've even seen some customers are upwards of 80%. You know, so there's definitely you know, almost every customer that we've analyzed so far today, they have a pretty big challenge when it comes to data conformity for sure.
Yep. And then this one is a little bit more abstract, but in my role as customer success, I do talk a lot with customers, and we talk a lot about the operational aspect of a standard and content. And, you know, it's one thing to have a documented standard, but another to actually use it and to have the infrastructure and culture in place to actually make sure that's a lasting effort. So a couple things here I put down that I think fosters that culture. A couple of these we've talked about, but really just quantifying the good and the bad content, or the result of having good and bad content, I think is something important for us to be able to take to our leadership and get their buy-off on an effort, right? Because to them, sometimes what they hear is, okay, this is going to be an effort, we don't understand the value of it, and it's never going to end. So why would we fund this? That kind of thing. So I think with that, we'll just keep things moving. I'll pass it back to you, Steve. We'll talk about more specifics in standard.
Wonderful. Thanks, Farley. Appreciate those insights. That was great. So we're going to talk about 3 main areas here. We're going to start off with library or folder naming strategies. And I think you're going to see a lot throughout these next 3 sections that there's no one way to skin a cat here, right? There's a lot of different ways we can approach these problems. And so when we're developing a naming convention for our folder structure, right, whether we have all our content on a network shared folder distributed to all of our offices, or whether we're using a content management application like UNIFI that has libraries, we have to consider a couple key points. First one we usually talk with our customers is about, are you a single or a multi-office? This will there be regional specialty needs for content in various places across the country or globally? The next key item is, are you a single or multidisciplinary firm? Various trades will gain efficiencies by having kind of their own content-specific libraries and not have to sort through other trades' content, right? So if I'm an HVAC designer, do I ever need to see electrical or some of these other products? It can kind of just bog down my access to content. It's all about efficiency. Now, the last one is really, are you a global or domestic firm? This is where things get fun. Do you have the need for imperial metrics? So units is a key factor. What about languages? We deal with lots of international firms, and they have certain portions of their library in Chinese or Asian characters. They have some in French. They have some in English. So the larger firm that you are, kind of the more challenges you inherit, I guess, and you have to kind of deal with and come up with strategies around. And then there's many regional code variances. So a lot of times we're going to be taking things from maybe a corporate library and then tweaking them for a local jurisdiction. So we need to have these strategies in place. And we've got a couple examples up top here on the screen. Stantec usually goes with their strategy is to use a schema with an office code and then a description of that particular code. So you can see here like the buildings in U.S. Gulf, so it's kind of a regional specific library. HDR does things a little bit different. They have kind of a library type, and then a regional sub-library, and then the content type, so approved HDR families. So that would be their approved overall families for that particular company. And then Axoscape is doing things a bit more trade-oriented. So what trade are you, and then what category of content? So HVAC equipment or HVAC annotations, so on and so forth. And then here at UNIFI, with customers that are using a content management application, we typically like to break down libraries based on region and country, and then if you need to, put in also language and units designations as well. So there's a couple different ways you can approach this, and hopefully these examples give you some good insights. Now the next one here gets pretty fun. But before we get on this, real quickly, Robert, at Stantec, so you use a specific naming convention for regional libraries. What was the driving factor for that?
So at Stantec, we have what's called business centers, which is basically the smallest financial unit you can sort of get to. And so every employee knows what business center they're part of, and every business center has a 4-digit code. So given where we are in our journey of trying to condense and collect content and standardize content from across the organization, we need to provide those business centers with a place to put their content. So hence the 4-digit code, and then a description of what it could be. And the example there is buildings U.S. Gulf, but you could also have something like water Winnipeg, Canada, or CA, right, to indicate that it's the water group that's in Winnipeg. And then what we do at a corporate level is we just do 000 and then a description of whatever that library is at a corporate level. And where we're trying to move towards is more of those 000 libraries likely broken down either just as Stantec in general or maybe some major organizational breakdowns. But we're big fans of tags and metadata. So we prefer not to manage any more libraries than we need to. We'd rather leverage the metadata either attached to the families or in the families and focus more on saved searches in UNIFI to make it easier for people to get to what they need or want.
Yeah, and you see that's a very consistent approach where most large-scale firms that deal with multiple regions, they want to kind of mitigate risk and make sure that somebody in one region is not using content specific to another region, right? Because then we end up with data inconsistencies, unit issues, sizing issues, all sorts of challenges that end up kind of popping their ugly heads up when we get into construction documents phases of projects.
We also want transparency, which is why we adopted a platform like UNIFI, because we want people to know what's out there, because it's also very conceivable that 2 different regions could be working together, and then they're going to need to identify whose content they're going to use, and everybody needs access to it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So, hey, somebody in the UK has got a great family here. I could take it, tweak it, and then imperialize it, I guess if that's a word, right, and use it here in the States. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well, kind of raise the efficiency across the board. So moving on to family naming conventions. Yeah, there's so many different ways to approach this particular challenge. What's really important to consider when developing our own naming conventions, right? We always like to recommend to customers just keep it simple, right? The old KISS rule, don't overthink it. It's very important, but it's not always the biggest hurdle to overcome when it comes to standards. There's lots of tools and utilities out there where we can batch rename content pretty quickly, but once you get going with a project with one standard, it's very hard to back up. So there are some pros and cons here, and it really does take some time to sit down and think about, a correct standard to integrate in our firms. So with so many different approaches here, we're just going to go through a couple of these and talk through these with our panelists. So Robert could probably talk for 2 days on this topic, so I'm going to try to summarize, and then we're going to go into more detail here. But Robert's got at Stantec, I should say, they have two primary methods, right? They have a model object convention. So if you're talking about an object, a table, a door, a window, there's one standard. If you're talking about annotation, they like to prefix it with tag, and you can see the structure. It's basically schema identifier, underscore, underscore, and then dash, dash. They have units, they have office codes, they have corporate identifiers in there. So a pretty complex, pretty regimented standard. HDR gets, they take a different approach. So HDR actually uses a master format number prefix. And this does help the organization in the Revit browser, because the Revit browser is something to remember, it's alphanumerical, right? So content is going to show up in a particular, based on the family name, and it's one of the main reasons why we put a naming convention together to begin with. But then they use family function, subfunction, and description. Now, Axoscape is, again, yet a different standard. That typically recommends that they do description and then a suffix, not a prefix, which is very different than what you see quite often. And Dad, can you talk a little bit, when we spoke yesterday, you told me a really good reason on why you use a suffix and not a prefix. Could you explain that reason to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So what was happening was that, we would have some items that were prefixed, and the issue is that users wouldn't find the non-prefixed, out-of-the-box items perhaps, or content from another client. So if we're working with one client and they've got prefixes, and working with another client and they may or may not have prefixes, we were getting questions in terms of, hey, where's this content? Where's that content? Well, we find without the suffix, and this is before the UNIFI system, of course, where you can do searches, having to call through these directories, it just made a lot of sense to just, hey, let's name things whatever, comes to mind first. And that way it makes it easier for users to find those things, and they're all in one place. They're all grouped together. So you're looking for doors. All the doors are grouped in one place. And we're adopting many of our client standards anyway. So to us, this kind of eliminated the question of, hey, where's this or where's that, because it was all they could find in one place, as opposed to searching through the prefix first and then scrolling all the way down and finding that. There are some hospital projects where we've had to insert tons and tons of content, and a lot of those hospital type projects, are indicated by their tag indicator as like a 3-letter tag, and so it was really easy for us to insert those items into the floor plan through the family browser just by simply typing in the first few letters, and then there you are, and you drag and drop from the family browser, as opposed to now many times that content comes to us with prefixes. It might have the word medical family, or medical device, or device, or something like that, and that made it a real pain for us. So the first thing that we would do in those projects is we would just go through and rename everything. We'd rename everything, get rid of the prefix, so that way just the 3-letter tag indicator is there, and we're able to insert families at lightning speed. So there you go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's about, because of the fact that the Revit browser, built-in Revit browser, is alphanumerical, you wanted to make sure folks were seeing all the available content, not just the prefix content. So that does make a lot of sense. So that was something, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I learned about that yesterday from you, which was pretty interesting. So, and then here at UNIFI, we've seen hundreds of different implementations of this, and I've seen, or we've seen some really successful implementations in the UNIFI application, particularly when folks are kind of doing a hybrid, a little bit of hybrid of HDR, and it's kind of a 2-digit code up front. Now, there's some pros and cons to this, right, based on how big or small firm you are. As master spec isn't used everywhere globally, which we'll talk about in a minute, but if you just did 08 and then a description, you'd be able to find your doors pretty quickly, and by just typing 08, there's all the doors, or you could just simply type double door or sliding door, and you'll find it there as well, because it's the way the search engine works. So again, I hope everyone sees from this example, there's a lot of different ways to approach this problem, and it does have to do with the size and scale of your firm and the challenges that you do face, but lots of different ways to skin a cat. There's also a couple really good standards that are published out there. ECMS2, they might be at 3.0 now, is a European MEP content standard. It's got a great naming convention portion to it. There's a great Dutch standard out there, NLRS, and then the Australia-New Zealand standard is very well written as well, the ANZRS. So we like all three of those standards, and we usually recommend for folks to read through those as they're approaching how to tackle the family naming convention challenge in their firms. So with that, Robert, you guys at Stantec, you've got a really thorough naming convention for your families. Do you want to provide some insight into why you guys put so much effort in this area, your BIM standard, and just go ahead and expand on that.
Sure. A vain hope of consistency, I think, is why we did it. We actually agree, I would say, with what Dat was saying earlier about why they went to suffixes as opposed to prefixes, which is why, example, the units and the STN identifier and the BC identifiers, those things are all at the end of our family names, because we would agree that having all that information front-loaded really just makes it more painful to try and find what you're looking for, particularly in the project browser. And then, obviously with the annotations, because of the uniqueness of that sort of category, that's why we went with the prefixes in that case. But, one of the big things we've also particularly stayed away from is any sort of code in the family name, because we just don't find that at the end of the day, it really provides value across the board the way that I think some people do think it does. I always argue that how many people actually have that particular code or table memorized? I don't. So, I mean, yeah, I've learned 08 is doors and openings, but, don't ask me what some of the other master format codes are for. And then, the way we look at it, there's a lot of different classification systems out there that are used for different reasons. So, master format is really tied very closely to your specifications and work product. OmniClass and Uniformat are really about either things I can buy or systems I will build. They're all important, and it's all data that we do want as part of our families, but we just don't see a lot of value in including that data in our family names. So we really encourage just sort of plain language names that articulate what the content is, so that people can easily identify it and they're not sitting there guessing what's going on. So if you want to hop to the next slide, Steve, that'd be great. And so, yeah, again, this is a very high-level view of how we sort of look at things. We've got loadable families and we've got system families, particularly in Revit. And again, things we can buy versus things that we sort of assemble or build on site. And, again, classification systems are going to vary depending on where you are, even within North America, and what clients want. And if you start to look more globally, you run into other systems where, again, if we've embedded that code information in the family name, somebody in a different country could quickly look at that family and be like, I don't know what that is. What's that mean to me? So,
right.
Again, trying to approach it from a very high-level view and making things easy to find.
And that master spec or OmniClass, whatever classification is relevant to that content, we're seeing a lot of folks. I wish we had some good objective analysis on, and we probably could run it, but we're seeing it embedded as meta tags or attached to the content as meta tags. And I think I tend to agree with you. I think the adding a prefix with a spec section or classification section, I think it comes from not having a database where you can attach additional metadata, and it became kind of one of those things that folks implemented over time to get organization and apply that data to that object. Whereas, I mean, would you agree it's more streamlined or efficient for you guys, and efficient, I should say, for you guys to add it as meta tags?
Yes. Absolutely, because again, it makes it easier to adopt content. At the end of the day, even though we've got a page describing how to name content, it's really not complicated, and we can then add more data as needed by way of metadata. So that's important to us.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks. Okay, so shared parameters. This is another real fun area. This is obviously a Revit-specific area of standards, right? Now, I think a lot of us are Revit shops, but there are a lot of our audiences maybe are ArchiCAD or other, other BIM platforms. And then this is really just about data and data naming, right? So the parameters that we add into our content. Now, in particular to shared parameters, it's a bit tricky to work with, and as we start to revamp our libraries and keep it in sync with our schedules, it can be quite challenging. So there's a couple key areas we're going to take a look at here. But first I want to go over the examples that we've got on the screen. Now, you just heard how much time and effort and thought that went into Stantec's family naming convention, and then we look at their shared parameter convention and it's underscore name. so quite polar opposites. So Robert, talk about why such simplicity on the parameter side, but such complexity on the family naming side.
Really because we want to get to a point where we have a very sort of standardized set of fields to be used in Revit and potentially any other application. So I know that, for instance, the HDR example there is, and Chris said this, so I'm not putting words in his mouth, but Chris basically said, this is an example basically straight out of the Revit style guide. And our argument against that, and unfortunately Chris isn't here to be my foil or I'm his foil, our argument against that is if you strictly follow that convention, you end up with a voltage parameter called fan voltage, and you end up with a parameter called pump voltage, and you end up with a parameter called AHU voltage. And what we really just want is voltage. And the underscore is there as a key to indicate that this is actually a Stantec-defined parameter, because nobody else is going to put an underscore in front of their parameter name intentionally. So the underscore is our little tripwire to know that this is actually theoretically a Stantec-defined parameter. And again, our long-term goal is to get to a centralized database where voltage is voltage is voltage, and there are tools available to help us manage that and basically transform content as necessary, so that we can say, oh, you have a parameter called pump voltage? Well, that's voltage for us. And then when a client comes along and says, I want a data export from your BIM model that you built for me, and I want all the voltages, for all my equipment, again, we're not having to chase down 50 different parameters. Hopefully it's just voltage.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, Dad, you've got item and then parameter name, and you said that you had swapped these and flip-flopped these from time to time. You want to talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, it just depends on how complicated the families end up being. If you've got a piece of family that's got multiple pieces to it, so sometimes we will use kind of a prefix modifier in front of that parameter name in order to further distinguish what it is, jam width, instead of just calling it width underscore jam sometimes. But on the more simpler families, we'll just stick with the width parameter. Just real quick though, concerning shared anything in Revit, we tend to just stay away from that like plague. I mean, it's shared parameters and shared coordinates. What we tell our folks is if it doesn't have to be shared, let's not use it, because then you're just kind of introducing a whole host of problems and issues. you know, for one thing, I know that, you know, we get a lot of drawings from folks, and the first thing, you know, we'll ask for is a shared parameters file, and it'll either be outdated, or they're going to ask which one, and it's going to be some modified shared parameters file that's located on someone's, you know, local hard drive, and, you know, and it's just a big mess. So if we can avoid shared parameters in general, we'll do it. But of course, you know, you can't obviously, you know, avoid all
Right. Yeah, you need them to schedule.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're a necessary evil, no matter what size firm you are. But I think I understand what you're saying. Use them sparingly. Use them only where it's really necessary.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. And so here at UNIFI, we do make a lot of content for a lot of folks with our UNIFI Create division, and we make content for A's and E's, we make content for manufacturers, and our standard is a little bit different. We try to be descriptive, pretty typical to what we're seeing above in the examples of Stantec and Axoscape. We also try to avoid units in the names, as our content may be used in different regions, right? So screen size is diagonal, okay? We can fill that in and build it in Imperial, but somebody opens that up and that product happens to be used in a metric environment, it'll automatically translate. We don't have inches or mm in there for millimeters to kind of describe what that is, as those units obviously, you know, adapt to the project settings. So we try to stay away from that as much as possible, but just keep it very human readable. We camel case our stuff from time to time. We just have a pretty simple standard there. So a couple steps we want to take, right? This is no trivial task, obviously, to get consistent with your data across your library. Create a single shared parameter file. So I had a customer the other day, you know, pretty large firm, sent us 24 shared parameter files, and that's all they could find. And so you know, it's inherent. You're going to have a lot of these things. Got to get them consolidated into a singular point of truth, a single shared parameter file to start. And then you got to start to verify the data in your company schedules, right? The reason we're making shared parameters so we can schedule that data most of the time. And so load all your schedules in a single file, verify the GUIDs if they match your shared parameter files, and try to get that consistent. And then start to look across your content libraries. You can't do it all at one time. It's very cumbersome. So maybe sweep through one category at a time using your usage data to say, hey, electrical equipment's used the most. Let's go clean that one up, make it consistent first. Don't get discouraged, right? Get as many folks within your company to help and divvy up that work. Like Robert had said, there's lots of great third-party tools out there that help you streamline parameter modification in batch across your families. And you know, look for those tools out there to help you do those things. And then, you know, another approach I've seen used quite successfully is, you know, have a WIP folder where stuff is being worked on and getting moved to the approved library over time, so that your designers can go to the approved library first, start to look there. If they don't find it, let me search in the other location as well. And that's an acceptable practice, and hopefully over time more stuff on the WIP moves into approved until you're finally done with that work. So, you know, eat the elephant, obviously, one bite at a time, and don't let perfection get in the way of progress, right? This is no trivial task, so it takes time. Okay, with that, we are going to jump into a quick demo. We just launched a couple weeks ago a new product called UNIFI Insight, and Insight couples the power of UNIFI's cloud with Microsoft's Power BI, the business intelligence platform, to assist us with health checks across our content libraries and really kind of create an action plan or a blueprint on how we go about updating our content and our data within our content. So our cloud, the UNIFI Cloud is able to mine extremely large amounts of content and libraries very, very efficiently, and then all the data sent in the BI, where we have some really great visualization tools to see exactly what needs our attention. Okay, so with that, I'm going to flip over to BI here. And so when we do an analysis on a company, all the content that's in a company's UNIFI account, we can send them this report, which is basically just through a web browser, and they can start to visualize different bits of data. Here we can see a simple block diagram. Where are the majority of my families in which family category? BI is really a powerful tool for visualization. All of these different visualizations are interactive, so as you click on them, you'll see data update on the different parts of the report, so that's really handy there. We can start to see things like imported CAD geometries. So we iterate through all the families and show you an exact blueprint, which families have imported CAD. I can see, hey, I've got a lot in sight, that kind of makes sense from Entourage types of families and our BC content, but I've got a lot of plumbing fixtures here, and I can click on that, see I've got 214 in plumbing fixtures. Here's the exact list of content I need to go fix, okay? So pretty quick and to the point to go in and make some actionable changes. This report's our file size report. So typically anything over 1.5 meg is kind of taboo. We want to keep our file sizes down as much as possible within reason. So I can use a data slicer real quickly, sort by 1.5 plus in file sizes, and I can see I've got 54 families that are above that threshold. I can see exactly what those families are, and also see across which family categories are applicable. Maybe I'm not worried about furniture systems, so I can click on lighting fixtures, and then see there's 17 in lighting fixtures with above that file size threshold. Next one here is a really fun report. So when we get into nested families, we have seen some, like Harley had stated earlier, we've seen some really, really interesting cases where folks had almost an 8-to-1 ratio of parent families to nested families, some really excessive nesting going on. We know nested families, excessive nesting can cause slowdowns and loading times, as well as just general Revit usage and panning and those types of things. So we can see here from a family parent level, we got 3,500 families. 520 are second level nesting, 93 thirds, 32 fourths, so on and so forth. We can see visually which particular categories are the biggest offenders of that, and then we also have the data down below to quickly identify exactly what those families are and the names of the nests as they're parsed out in our cloud. We've got all different types of reports in here. There's parameter formula reports that look at excessive lengths of formulas. There's recommendations on which parameters match in name to your shared parameter names, but they're not from your shared parameter file. But this one in particular is a really great one. This is the conformity, so parameter conformity analysis, where we can see here, and this is an actual data slice from a customer here. So we'll see this customer had 1,300 shared parameters in their company shared parameter file. Out of all of their content in UNIFI, they were only using 95 of those shared parameters across their entire catalog. So that's a really, that raises a red flag immediately. There's 446 parameters that were in use from some other source, some other GUID that don't match your shared parameters. And then there's all sorts of filters in here to start to dive into this content and look at where exactly is these parameters coming from and which family categories. So again, actionable insights, actionable analytics so that we can get a blueprint so we know exactly what to go and fix as a firm, and just be very, very efficient at that process. So if anyone is interested in learning more about UNIFI insights, please visit our website at unifilabs.com/insights. You can request a full library analysis directly from this page, or you can always contact us at sales@unifilabs.com. Everyone who's attended the webinar, we're going to be emailing out a free BIM content standards guideline. This document covers much of what we've covered today with our panelists, so be on the lookout for that. And standards never stand still, right? They're always constantly evolving, so we'll be constantly evolving this from time to time as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to now open it up to questions from our audience. I see we've got a lot of questions coming in. Please do go ahead and submit your questions. I see some of my colleagues already answering some questions on the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and start to pick out a couple here. Okay, so here's a good one for Robert in particular. So how do you effectively manage the acquisition of a new company, being a large company like yourselves, and absorb or integrate their content library? How do you approach blending that into your corporate standards? That's a good question.
We're still working on that, but the goal is to evaluate what's there and basically translate and transform what we decide to keep into matching our standards and best practices. So today we bring their stuff into a separate library in UNIFI so they still have access to that, and then we in theory at least start a process of vetting and reviewing what they've got, and as that is adopted, so to speak, into the Stantec vernacular, we want to translate that and transform that where necessary, which is why some things we try to keep fairly simple at the end of the day, so it makes it easier to transform and translate.
No, that makes a lot of sense there. So let's see, we've got I've got a lot of questions here. Okay, we're probably not going to answer all these questions. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up via email, because I know we're running kind of short on time here. Dat, here's a good one for you. So the question is, it's almost inevitable that manufacturing content is going to make it into your projects and libraries at some point. When conversing with manufacturers, what recommendations do you have for their content creation strategies?
Oh man, where do we begin? So I guess there's definitely a list of do's and there's a list of don'ts. I think for the most part, I mean most designers will agree that simpler is better. And in fact, if you can have different versions according to LOD of your different manufacturing objects, and I think some manufacturers have started to do this. Something that's LOD 200, 300, 400, so on and so forth. I'm considering using just sketches and plan RCP representations as well as elevations. But then for visualization, and that's where it's important to have multiple versions. I think is for visualization purposes, you do want to have some of those bells and whistles on your content. Obviously, the tried and true methods of maintaining the same insertion points throughout a product line. That's huge. We swap things all the time, and have it jump around on you is terrible. And then also to kind of test to see how these items show up in different Revit's different shading modes. Hidden line mode versus shaded versus rendered. And I would even say, to contact some of these other, third-party apps such as, Inkscape and V-Ray and Autodesk Live and RS Means and such, and see how your content works, with some of these other third-party vendors that most of us designers work with. It's very disheartening, when you have this beautiful model and then you bring in a piece of content and then it doesn't render correctly, and then you're having to go in and modify and edit that. I would definitely avoid using 3D text. I see this a lot of times, 3D text to indicate like a model number or something like that. I would just avoid those like the plague. A just adds a bunch of useless geometry, and then you should be using metadata for that instead anyway. And then lots of custom subcategories we're seeing. Keep those to a minimum, that'd be great, because otherwise you need a separate manual just to turn things on and off. Custom materials with non-standard fill patterns and bitmaps and things like that don't translate very well. Otherwise you have to download a zip file and it just becomes a huge mess. And then finally, I would say just avoid importing meshes and surface modelers from items such as SketchUp and 3D Studio Max and even AutoCAD 3D. Multiple surfaces look terrible, and there's no way to parameterize or scale those objects. So those are those are just kind of off the top of my head. Those are some of the things that we've seen and do's and don'ts there.
Great, thanks. So we are getting a lot of questions about Insights. Just to clarify, UNIFI Insights is a new product. It does not come with the UNIFI Core platform, so it is an additional product that can be purchased. And so just reach out to sales or your customer success team here at UNIFI, and they'll give you more information about that and how you can go about receiving an analysis report. So I just want to make sure we clarify that. I've seen several of those come through. Here's another good question from Adam. Does the UNIFI manufacturing content come with the basic license? So that does. That's called UNIFI Connect, and any of the manufacturers that place their content or distribute through the UNIFI platform, all UNIFI Core customers have access to that at no additional charge. So you can go in there. We've got a previous webinar we've done on that as well with more information about that, and do check on that subscription center in your analytics or your online UNIFI application, as we're adding more and more brands every week on there. So do check back on there regularly as more brands be coming out. So yeah, but that is included. So that's a great question there. Let's see. We're gonna probably take one or two more questions here. Okay, so here's another one I think is good for Dad. This sounds like it's coming from a building owner here. It says, as a building owner developer, what are the key areas of BIM process we can try to influence our design and build teams to follow in order to enhance our overall end product or complete the project more efficiently? And we got about 2 minutes on that, Dad.
Okay, I'll use 30 seconds. I'll try that.
Okay.
So this is kind of an ideal question, just because we're doing a lot of work with prototypical restaurant work with some of these restaurant chains, we don't work with Burger King, but I'm using Burger King as an example, for instance, and they have a very unique, they have some very unique challenges, they will go ahead and design some prototypical restaurants, and recently they've been switching to building information modeling from CAD, and what that's doing is creating all kinds of challenges for them. One of the things that they're touting, the reason why they're going this route is because they want to be able to easily and effectively swap things out. So utilizing very customized content to be able to swap things out quickly. Hey, how does this kitchen item look? This piece of kitchen equipment look and function, and what happens if we swap it around, move things around? So a high deal of flexibility is great, and then that's what we're kind of helping them with as well. Plus being able to extract all kinds of information from the model too, and so the I in BIM is very important, there. So as much as you can pour into a particular family in terms of that useful content, that's great. So some of the downstream uses, or actually, let's do upstream uses, downstream uses, and some of the upstream type uses that they're trying to take advantage of is visualization during conceptual design. So you don't have to send a model out to get it rendered separately. Now they're rendering inside. They're using third-party applications such as Inkscape and V-Ray and things like that in order to virtually walk through the space. Possibly even use it for training purposes and things like that. So
yeah, that's a good point.
So that's huge. So content goes a long way into making sure that looks nice and smooth and clean. And then some of the downstream uses is, pre-construction coordination with sub-trades, being able to identify issues before they even go out to the field, we mentioned training purposes with VR capabilities and things like that, and then finally, facilities management, so being able to take something from Revit and take it to, through Autodesk Building Ops or something like that, for FM later on down the road is huge, and I can't stress it enough, but good quality components are a huge part of this, and a lot of their partners are actually, creating things in-house and specifically for this, and so everything that we've talked about today, these are all these, building owners are looking at, all these things to kind of streamline their workflow in terms of, how do we get this restaurant built as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think we see a big uptick in the owner space on our platform, and it's really interesting to see them getting so engaged in helping to standardize data and standardize content amongst their design teams that are working for them. So, well, with that, guys, I do apologize. We have a ton more questions. We're going to have to get to these via emails. We're out of time. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had a really tremendous turnout. I bet our best so far, really excellent. And I want to just thank our amazing panelists who graciously provided us with their expertise and guidance. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Robert, you guys are absolutely amazing. So thank you very much. And everyone, please be on the lookout for our follow-up emails to all attendees, and we'll give you the recordings and the free BIM content standards doc, and try to get to any of your questions you asked as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have yourselves a great day.